this evening for the first Adirondack Experience and Adirondack Diversity Initiative discussion on the Black experience in the Adirondacks. I'm Dr. Donathan Brown, the Assistant Provost and Assistant Vice President at the Rochester Institute of Technology, co-founder of the human resources consulting firm Adirondack Diversity Solutions, and proud ADI core team member. Tonight, I am pleased to be joined by the distinguished and inaugural director of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, Nikki Hilton-Patterson. Nikki, thank you so very much for joining me this evening.
Thank you for having me, Donathan.
Indeed. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. First, if you'd like to submit a question during this program, please submit it through the Q&A function box located at the bottom of your screen. Please know you will only be able to see the question you submitted. Second, for questions that are not addressed this evening, ADI will add more information to its website, along with providing you with a link to the recording of this evening's discussion. And finally, if you're having any trouble during this live stream, please feel free to post a question to the Q&A box, where one of our talented and technically savvy staff persons will provide guidance. Well, without further ado, Nikki, let us begin. The first question I oftentimes hear when I mention the number of years I've come to the Adirondacks is, why? What attracted me to the park and what continues to draw me back? So moving in this manner, my first question to you is this: why the Adirondacks? Why here? Why now?
Okay, so the first word, so when I thought about coming here, freedom in the land, right? So my background, my upbringing is very non-traditional. So I was born in Jamaica, had the experience of living in Norway as a teen, and living in Jamaica. My mother would send us to the hills of Portland, Jamaica. And so if you know anything about the Portland Hills, it is dense forestry, beautiful rivers and streams, just pristine, beautiful, and very, very rural, very, very rural. And this is how I love the land. Not only that, my father was also a Rastafari, and he encouraged in us a love and relationship to the environment that was more akin to what I see with First Nations people. And so I want to, before we go any further, I want to just acknowledge the First Nations people and that we are actually on their land, their space. And so that's my background. Then when I moved to Norway, we lived on a little island, 300 people, so rural that your last name was the place you lived. So I lived in Lunda and my last name was Lunda. So yeah, so I mean, and the community there prepared for me. They prepared for this Jamaican girl. They actually did a lot of what I would consider now cultural consciousness work way back then. So can you imagine? And so everybody knew who I was. They had a sort of globalized understanding of what it meant to be Jamaica. Yes, there was some exotification and so on, because they've never seen a Black person, many of them. And so I lived amongst First Nations Europeans, Indigenous Europeans, saw me, and developed this love for the land, but not only the love for the land, but the protection for the land and what it meant. And so after graduate school, I never intended to stay in New York City. But that's where the 3/3 of the Jamaican people and my family are, right? But it was always my intention after graduate school to I was looking to actually New England, right? I'd already worked in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes and loved it. And so when I was looking in Maine, Massachusetts, where I went to undergrad, I saw the ad for the Adirondacks and I was like, oh my God, this can't be. Right? Because immediately it gave me an opportunity to do a couple things. To live on the land in a place that wasn't overrun and overpopulated. And people were intentional about environmentalism and conservation in a different way. But I felt that there were many of us in New York City. There are a lot of practitioners, there are a lot of activist scholars. I wanted to go where we were few, where the harvest was plenty, but the laborers are few. And the land called to me, and the Adirondacks called to me. And it's still calling to me, even in this very difficult time.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. I mean, I think about the T-shirts and the saying, "The mountains are calling, and I must go." And I think, thinking about and listening to your life story, your journey, this makes sense to you. It makes sense for you to be within the Adirondacks because your upbringing, albeit not within the Adirondacks, has a lot of similarities. And I think that is a very fascinating story. So thank you so much for sharing that. Let's talk a bit about the Adirondack Diversity Initiative a bit, where you serve currently as its distinguished inaugural director. For those unfamiliar with ADI, can you share with us its mission and goals? I think this is a very important one as more and more people are drawn into ADI. To talk a little bit more about it.
So it's very simply, and I'm just going to give you the elevator speech that's basically on the website, right? So the mission of ADI is to develop and promote strategies to help the Adirondack Park become more welcoming and inclusive of all New Yorkers, both visitors and permanent residents. And we believe, and the founders of ADI believe that a more inclusive New York was integral to the sustainability and longevity of the park. And that's data. The data shows that it's becoming increasingly underpopulated. Young people are leaving in droves. The median age is higher in the surrounding communities. The largest industry, the fastest growing industry is elder care.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you about the population trends, but also, and you, Donathan, were integral in the foundation or the creation of ADI because you developed a lot of the language and the business plan that got the funding. So you know that by 2030, the population is going to be down to 1970 numbers, right? So that's a massive exodus of people. And so, but also what's happening is for the last 10 years, the population of New York State has been held constant by the influx of people to New York City, right? And those influxes, those numbers of people that are coming are increasingly identified or categorized by this country as Black and people of color, diverse populations. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They are the largest voting bloc, and they're becoming increasingly conscious of their power, not just their political power, but their economic power. And we wanted to, and ADI is invested not only in bringing more diverse groups to the community, but developing an entire generation of stakeholders, of diverse people who are invested in the welfare and longevity of the park and want to see it sustained and protected.
Right.
Those people are increasingly members of diverse communities across race, class, gender, LGBTQI plus communities, immigrant communities, and so on. So yeah, so that's really our mission. We focus on, 3 and now 4 core areas: education, recreational, economic, and increasingly now since the anti-racism and anti-Black racism movement, public policy and public interest. And so those are our core areas, and we develop programs. But I've only been here for 6 months? December 3rd. So this all happened when we are really creating, expanding our systems and our capacity. And so, yeah, so mission in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that resonate with a lot of people in what you just said insofar as reflecting upon the mission of ADI as we think about developing a more welcoming and inclusive environment for everyone, for all backgrounds. We know that there are some demographics, some members of our greater community that face challenges that others do not. And so we'll get into that a little later, but I'm glad you were able to draw that out. As we think more about ADI and think about the work that you've been doing in your short tenure, 6 months or so, can you talk about whether or not the murder of George Floyd, what impact that has had on ADI's goals, you and your work?
Urgency is the word that comes to mind. Urgency and an enhanced willingness of more than a few members of our community to lean into the discomfort of talking about race and anti-Blackness. And I see that urgency and willingness. And so ADI is not just one person, right? it was started, and the founders, the co-founders, are Martha Swan, Pete Nelson,
Mhm.
forgive me, Willie Janeway, and Paul High, right? And with your help and others, created and crafted and was running this all by volunteer and donations before it
Yep.
got started. So what has happened since George Floyd is that the community has become desperate for knowledge, desperate for learning, desperate for a way forward, desperate for education. What do we do? How do we start that work? And so my core team, the core team of people who you are a part of, you understand how we've been flooded. I can just, for example, I got 102 emails yesterday. And so the urgency of the need for education and what race means, and it is exponentially, because when I got here and I started this labor, the need was great. I got requests and calls, and people wanted to know more and engage the curriculum that we were designing, the ADI curriculum. But that has been, that's just like 100 times more now. However, and it has caused us to specifically to expand our focus area into public policy and public interest, specifically as it concerns shared spaces, public lands, and law enforcement.
Yeah.
So we've had we have gone ahead and looked and created specific recommendations for law enforcement when it comes to people of color, Black people specifically, and people of color, and what policing looks like and what it really means to protect and serve, and for them, for the constant denials. And I've had two meetings, one with the Saranac Lake Police and one with the Lake Placid police chiefs, willing to do the work, but espousing some incredulity when I talk about this is the experience of Black people being stopped by the police. This is the experience of Black people being policed on the street sides. You know,
Yeah.
just incredulity one after the other, and so the murder of George Floyd has caused us to expedite really what we already were going to roll out, which is our anti-racism education and mobilization campaign.
Right. Yeah, it's really unfortunate that in so many circles it took the death and the murder, rather, of George Floyd to really galvanize many parts of the nation and many parts of our community around anti-racism. For far too often, as you know, we've had these conversations and it didn't necessarily reach the plateaus by which it should have. But now we're in this moment where we're all, many of us at least, are digging in, listening, learning, and engaging. And so on that note, if I'm an individual who's listening, learning, and engaging, I'm dedicated to making the Adirondacks more welcoming and inclusive and doing my part to be an anti-racist within this society. How can someone get involved with an ADI? What does that look like for someone?
So it's very easy, but you need to just bear with us, okay? So as I said before, it's myself and the 10 core team members. Yourself is one, and you understand how we've been working overtime, and everyone on the core team are leaders in the community. They are leaders in their community, and they have their own roles and responsibility, but working overtime to attend to the kind of work we have to do. So if you go to the website, click join us on the toolbar. It's very easy to navigate. Click join us, fill out the form. We will get it. Tell us your interest. It's going to ask you just why you're interested. And so just tell us what you want to do. And if it's just, you just want to be a part of our news feed or our newsletter that's coming up, or if you want to be active, let us know. We will get back to you. Just give us a little time. Okay. It's just myself as hired staff, and I have the core team members who are fielding dozens of requests now. But I just want to say that quickly, you asked me, and I didn't talk about the for ADI, what has changed since George Floyd's death. And for me, I mentioned that it's the emotional labor has become very difficult. for we who
Yeah.
are Black. And I use that term a lot, and I give credit to Dr. Tommy Shelby. I don't know, he's at Harvard, he's a philosopher. I discovered his book when I came here when I was 29, and and philosophy, Africana philosophy was one of my loves, still is. We who are Black have had to carry what Du Bois called the double consciousness, and
Right.
even more so in this moment. And so I was talking about the fact that I know that when they wrote the racist comments here in Saranac Lake on Pine Street, I live just from Pine Street, and I run 5 mornings a week, and I have to run past that sign. So I know who they were writing it for. Okay? I know that. And so to carry that emotional labor, to do that emotional labor and still do the work is very difficult. And that's what, since George Floyd's death, this work looks like to me now. I'm in this beautiful place. I'm accessing the kind of freedom and land that I love, but I'm having to carry on an extra suit of armor because of anti-Black racism and the targets against my person and my life in this community.
Yeah. No, completely understandable. And I think as we continue to talk about and educate individuals about the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, there is hope. There are glimmers of hope throughout much of the work that you've been engaged in, that we've been engaged in collectively. We have great partners throughout the 6 million acres that make up the Adirondacks. A lot of great groups, including the Adirondack Experience, the Council, the Foundation, and others. And so we have a great group of individuals who are really dedicated to making things better. And so absolutely. So that's something I would like everyone to know, that there are many great individuals and people involved. So that's always a positive thing.
That's the only reason why I'm still here, is because of these partners and affiliates and amazing people who've leaned in and just been very vocal and intentional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your comments lead me to my next question. Oftentimes we hear from individuals in the Adirondacks who say, we don't have those, air quotes, sorts of problems, meaning issues as they pertain to race relations. Given your outreach, your efforts, and your experiences at this point, what would you say to those individuals who believe the Adirondacks do not have problems with race relations?
Oh my gosh. Well, well, I have 55 Black people and 34 people of color based on the data I've collected so far that would disagree with you. Okay. Some of them will be on our Driving While Black panel. Okay. I reached out to the network to ask people for if they would be willing to share their experiences. And so I'm working on the oral history project, the Black Experience in Adirondack, with the Adirondack Experience Museum, where they've already voice recorded their experiences. I got 77. 77. I had to tell them, look, folks, I can only put 7 of you on the panel. Yes. Okay. Because that's not the case. And so it's a testament to, and I'm going to name it, white privilege, when you cannot notice or you don't know that the Black people and the people of color around you feel oppressed. There is racism here. I've experienced it myself within the first few days of being here, with the white cop who was profiling me around the block 4 or 5 times before I reached the end of the block, right? And even though, and that in of itself is minute compared to the black and brown bodies who have lived here for years and have gone back and forth. So no, that is not true. But the challenge is not, the challenge is that we are not believed. We're not believed. But and also that if we're talking about disrupting and challenging institutional and structural racism, we have to talk about the people in power. And so I'm going to say it again, even though I know that the police force in these 2 areas are very receptive and they're very willing to learn, they also espouse some incredulity that there was discrimination and racism in the community. I was even asked, why is it that people of color don't come to the Adirondacks? Right? So, I mean, and this was someone in charge of maintaining law and order.
Sure.
So
Sure.
this is my, yeah.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, to say the least. I think, if nothing else, we can at least speak to cognitive dissonance. In other words, for many non-Black and non-folks of color, this isn't a topic that you have to think of, right? This is something that you can choose to tune out and tune away from. But it is, in fact, a lived experience of many of us. And so I think your conversations as they pertain to race relations and the 70 some odd responses you had for the 7 individuals that could be on the panel, I think is an ongoing testament, an oral history of the issues that are at hand here. And so I think there's a lot to be learned for many communities. And so I'm glad to see that you are at the helm, assisting in delivering these programmatic initiatives that will uplift us and better raise the consciousness of those within the community.
We cannot do it alone. We still need partners. We still need people. I'm talking anything from financial resources to your time to your influence. These are still necessary. So go ahead and go on our website and fill in the join us. Tell us what you can do. Tell us what you want to do. Okay, and just give us time to get back to you. Thank you. Thank you for those who have been our partners, but we're calling you in, not calling you out. So as we're talking about these experiences and I'm naming the interactions. It's not about, it's not so much calling out, it's calling in. I'm calling you into the fold, calling you into the work, calling you into leaning into the discomfort and the difficult work of doing anti-racism, anti-racist work, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely, which is why I thought it was important to let people know and give a shout out, quite frankly, to those who are leaning in, who are rolling up their sleeves in the organizations, John Brown Lives and others who are doing the work, who are in the community and having these exchanges and quote unquote uncomfortable conversations. And so, again, great work going on, Nikki. So much praise to you for leading those efforts. You organized a meeting, an online meeting, as we'll call it, of African-American residents within the Adirondacks a few weeks back to check in with them to see how they were doing in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. Were there any common themes that emerged from that conversation that might be useful to think about today?
Yes. A common theme was not walking alone. Not walking alone. And so my background is and so literally writing a dissertation means you're still collecting data and analyzing data. So immediately my mind goes to themes. And so not walking alone. The youngest person in the group was 20 years old, born and raised here, right? And the oldest person was almost 80. And the sentiment was the same. 40 years, I have never walked. I always take a white person with me when I'm going into the wilderness, when I'm walking alone at night. This was an ongoing theme among everyone. And we titled it Healing Circle and Black Support Group. Mm-hmm. Right? Not walking alone because the outdoors is precarious. The precarious space for the Black body.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot to unpack there, and I think for those who are just becoming more familiar with these conversations, as many folks are now, I think there's a lot to learn here as we think about some of the unwritten rules, quote unquote, about being Black in America. A lot has been done recently within many outlets talking about what that means and how the conversations differ across racial lines. So having the talk, quote unquote, is far different in many Black communities when we think about ways in which of interacting in public, interactions with law enforcement, amongst other things. These are real concerns, real conversations. And so your observation as a concurrent theme of never walking alone really speaks to that. And that's an issue that we have to tackle together as a community, as a state, and as a nation, is we think about ways in which we can continue to make not only the Adirondacks a great place to visit, but, as a sign says in Tupper Lake, a great place to live, work, and play. And so we think about that as well.
Yes.
I want to draw this out a little bit more because earlier in the conversation, you talked about one of the online programs, AntiRacism, for instance. Two, I believe, have taken place already with more to come.
Yeah.
Can you share with us some of the goals these programs have and tell us a little bit more about the impressive panelists you've recruited to speak with you and the audience?
First of all, it's about giving you language, context. So we want to because of the sort of overwhelming need that people have been expressing in the community. Where do we start? We don't understand. What are we doing? Let's start with some foundational knowledges. And so a big part of it is providing you with the language, the context, history, and then move from intent to action in terms of, so the first one was just really talking about defining these terms: racism, systemic racism, white privilege, and so on. The second session was, we went all the way and we got to what it means to be an ally. And our esteemed panelist, the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Dr. Michelle Cromwell, stopped us in the middle of our focus and said, I don't want an ally, I want an accomplice. And so at that moment, we're revealing some new knowledges to folks that is more suitable to the moment. You know, allyship was suitable to the moment right up until George Floyd, then the knee was on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you move from allyship that if we think about how it has been defined and co-opted, can come with some white fragility. Sometimes you get stuck with denial and hurt feelings, right? But an accomplice is someone who is intentional about doing work that attends to systemic racism and structural oppression. What does that look like? And so that's where we're taking you with these anti-racism series. So at our last session was talking about, so here we are, actor, ally, and accomplice. What does it mean and what does it look like in your everyday life? And we looked at 4 areas: family, business, work, and in your white communities. Afterwards, so all of this is about taking you from intent to action, by giving you the knowledges and the strategies to do the work in your own life and your community, your workplace. The next session is going to be white male anti-racist accomplices speak. And so we're gonna have a group of our white male accomplices, the people who we work with, Jonathan, the people who have had our back, front and rear guard, people who have supported this work and supported me personally throughout all of this. They're gonna be speaking, right? And they're gonna be moderated by Dr. Adam Dewberry. He's a distinguished anthropologist who is one of the many white male anti-racist scholars that I know, and he just happens to work in Inca. He's our food justice person, so he's sitting at the intersections of the rural economy and some critical anti-racism work. And then we're going to do, the females are going to take over, the females from the ADI, and then finally we're going to finish up with a workshop. Straight workshop. You're going to have breakout rooms, and this is going to have Dr. Dewberry, Dr. M. Nicole Horsley has joined us. She's an associate professor at
Ithaca College. Yes.
And we went to graduate school together. That's my homegirl. She graduated before me. We met at Indiana University when I started there. Just a lot of critical, and I'm going to say she spits critical shit. You know, and so she and I have been talking about sort of your prolific work around race and public policy and how that's going to inform the breakout rooms. So I'm telling you now that we're using your work for the breakout rooms in the anti-racism workshop. And of course our brother Clifton Harcum, who is a diversity officer at SUNY Potsdam. But what is elucidating and powerful about this team is that we're at the intersections of community and institution. So you have 2 diversity officers from the SUNY system, right? Then you have 2 diversity officers, an activist scholar, and myself, right? So we're tapping into the different intersections of our society and bringing these knowledges together. So that's what the Anti-Racism 101 series is about.
No, this is amazing and quite fascinating and dynamic, to say the least. Let's pause here for a moment, Nikki, because I don't think we've given out the URL, the web address for folks to visit if they're unfamiliar. Can you please give us the web address to visit?
Diversity ADK. So diversityTYADK.org. Diversityadk.org. Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. It just dawned on me. We should probably send folks to the website since we've mentioned it, but didn't give out the web address itself. So thank you very much for doing that. There's a lot to unpack as we think about the state of race relations in America, in New York State, and the North Country, and the Adirondacks. I can't help but to think about this within the grander scheme of your work as it pertains to climate. Oftentimes, when we hear climate, we think in a meteorological sense about the weather, quite frankly. But both you and I and others know that we're thinking about climate in an organizational sense, in a community sense, in a communal sense, in a social sense, in a business sense. And so I'm wondering, you've been within the Adirondacks for about 6 months now, as you mentioned. What's your assessment on the climate and the different areas that you interact and interface with on a daily basis?
Well-meaning, but like you said, cognitive dissonance, right? So there are pockets of activists and people who get it,
Yeah.
they get it, and they are intentionally sitting and doing the work as a lifelong journey, not just a destination. But there's a lot of ignorance, and ignorance is what we call cognitive dissonance in terms of climate. Yeah. So there's a lot of ignorance, and that ignorance becomes intransigent. You don't and resistant, especially when the oppressed identifies to the oppressor that you are oppressing me, and you're part of the oppressive system.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than lean in and learn, there are those who dig in,
Yeah.
and who are at the forefront of representing this community, making systemic change. They're leaders in the community, but they dig in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we come up against roadblocks. And that's what the climate is. And so the ADI is really at the intersection of environmental and social justice, using that word lightly, social justice. But there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of unwillingness to relinquish the power that comes with saying I'm wrong. I need to learn. Yeah, there's a lot of that, but there's also a lot of strength and power and people willing to lean in and do the work. And that's where we sit. Yeah.
This is good.
In this community looks like for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's do this. Pardon me. Let's take a moment to see if we have any questions. And for those of you who are viewing this from the comfort of your home, please feel free to send questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. I think we have a question that is in now. And let me take a look and see if I can look at this now. Okay. So here's our first question for you, Nikki. I'll toss this to you. I like that you've taken the initiative to meet with law enforcement in the Adirondacks. Is there any talk of more long-term partnerships with agencies to help educate them on the experience of African American or people of color within the Adirondacks?
So so we came up with some recommendations for local law enforcement, and one of them was being part of their a series of in-services, right? And so what I found out speaking to them is that they didn't any sort of diversity, equity, inclusion training, workshops, any cultural consciousness work stopped once they left the academy. Stopped, right? Can you imagine? And so a part of that is we have Pete Nelson is the ADI law enforcement, our law enforcement liaison. And so Pete is speaking with them. We're looking to create a series of in-services, working around their budgets, working around and when I say budget, I mean how the time that the officers have right? But we expect a certain kind of commitment in terms of paying your officer to be at these in-services. So this is, we are looking for a long-term commitment, and we're looking for to have a liaison, an ADI liaison in every single police force and law enforcement agency in the park. We're talking about accountability. We're talking about having community voices, especially Black voices, right? Because we want you to understand what accountability means as white people, and especially white law enforcement. Now, the idea, people have talked a lot about defunding the police. I've been honest about it. I don't know what that means, but I need to know. I would rather see a reinvention of what it means, reinventing what it means to protect and serve, with a clear understanding and clear work that they're doing anti-racist education for the police force, every single one. That's what I'd like to see. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Nikki, let's jump to the next question here. How is the Adirondack Diversity Initiative funded today? This is an easy one for you.
Yes. Okay. So after the 4 or 5 years that y'all tried to get funding and threw in your own monies, it was through the very quiet, resilient, constant work of people like Senator Betty Little, Senator Jose Serrano, different people. And I mentioned their names. I apologize if I'm forgetting some names. I mentioned them in my last segment, Anti-Racism 101. Who were constant about getting ADI in the environmental budget. Remind me of the name of the acronym. You have so many acronyms up here in the Adirondack. So it was the environmental budget, and so $250,000 was put in the budget after constant work by the ADI core team members, and a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of under the ground and campaigning, and so they got that, and now the governor has agreed to put it in his own budget, so to continue the funding for ADI. So this is how it's funded. That's very easy.
Yeah, no, and I think, even at a state level, if we think about this politically, yes, there are individuals from both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, who see this effort, who see this initiative, who see your work as an investment that has an excellent potential return on the investment, and something that is long-term and sustainable. This isn't something that we do for a year and say, well, check the box, we've done that. And so I think that's very important to underscore here. Let's take you to our next question here. Does the white ignorance you're observing in the Adirondacks worse or deeper than in other places you have lived, studied, or worked? And this is a fascinating question because this is something you and I were talking about before we began, so please lead us in.
It's a different model of ignorance, right? It's and I talked about I mentioned a very gifted DEI professional who based on its collection of data and research said that the biggest obstacle to structural change around racism are white liberals, right? And so we were in the workshop and everybody was like, oh, okay, let's hear where this brother's gonna go with that. And he talked about the ways in which those who espouse or maintain anti-racist ideologies and racist positionalities are very vocal. They're very clear about their stance, right? And you know who they are. But there are, and I'm not calling anybody, I'm calling people in. There is a way in which there are some, and this is what was said, there's a way in which some white liberals get racial fatigue. And so because they've been doing the work, if they are approached, or someone Black or brown, or someone in the a person of color says, well, that was microaggressive against me, that was racist, and I want to tell you why. They get stuck in guilt and shame and denial and can't move past that. And so this is what a lot of what I see here sometimes that looks different from living in Georgia. In Georgia, you know where to go, right? You know where to go. And you're not surprised when you see the Confederate flags and the lawn jockeys. You're not surprised. But here you are surprised because you expect that New York is a bastion of liberalism and people's working to equality and equity. And that is the case. There are many, and we are here because of that. Our existence in this ADI is because of those who are working and walking and loving with us, right? But it looks different because it is cloaked in
Sure.
liberal progressiveness, as opposed to people who are just going to be straight and tell you, hey, I don't like you, N-word.
Yeah.
Don't even walk past my door, and you know you can't walk in this neighborhood half a certain. So that's the difference that I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think you and I have similar experiences and similar ways of viewing things. As we think about it, you are recalling your time in Georgia. I think about my time in Texas during my doctorate, and I think it is a different model, as you suggest, in as much as I know from the very beginning, and it's very upfront. And so there are no stones left unturned as to how you feel about my presence, my being, or otherwise. But yeah, as I think more about your answer, I begin to see it more and more. Let's go to another question here. What makes a great ally or accomplice? Talk to us a little bit, Nikki. What does that look like insofar as what individuals can do? We have folks who are submitting questions now saying, I'm ready to act, I'm ready to serve, I'm ready to be a better person, but I need help insofar as you telling us, instructing us, giving advice as to what makes a great ally or accomplice.
So I'll give you just a anecdotally, right? So an ally is someone who will at the Thanksgiving dinner, and I'm gonna hear a racist joke or a joke that impugns First Nations people. And impugns, it's racist, right? It's colonized. And will stop the speaker and try to educate them there. But an accomplice goes even further and makes sure that it never happens again, right? An accomplice goes further to support businesses, Black-owned businesses, and to put their money where their mouth is. An accomplice actually educates themselves about the people running for office or decide to run for office themselves, right? An accomplice attends to structural inequities and structural racism in a way that is critical and will make change. An ally is there, they'll walk with you, they'll go to the marches, they'll be, I call allies political hobbyists. I love my allies, right? But allies tend to get bogged down in the sort of their personal space and don't go beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
An accomplice does the critical work, keeps pushing, keeps educating, keeps allowing, and as white fragility, D'Angelo says, keeps expanding their stamina for the discomfort.
Right.
That's
Right.
an accomplice, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that as we think about the membership of the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, we're surrounded by great accomplices.
And that's why, yeah.
Absolutely. And so again, for individuals who are wanting to learn more about it, continue to follow programs such as this. We'll come directly to your living room or wherever you may be watching or listening to us, and we'll continue to do so. Let's go along to the next question, Nikki, if you don't mind. We're doing pretty well on time, but I want to make sure that we get through some questions here. The next question is this. New York is a large state, yet many people lack access to nature in their locality. How can ADI promote the appreciation of nature for people who may not have that access?
Oh gosh, we've got programs lined up. COVID-19 stopped us. Our bidirectional program alone. So I have, I mean, it's written out on paper. We got DC backing us. We've got Senator Serrano, different people in Albany for a bidirectional exchange. 55 students signed on, 55. And they wrote beautiful letters from the Bennington School. So from elementary, middle, and high school, 55. And we had 3 partners who were going to house them, feed them. The programs were beautifully written. We had the Wild Center. We had the Adirondack Experience Museum. We were creating this energetic program. And so it wasn't that the 55 kids were coming here from the Bronx, from the Bennington School, the Pablo Cabrals, and DeWitt Clinton High School, but they were going to be, they were being actively matched with 55 kids locally. So they were going to come in series, in groups of 5 and 10 for a week at a time, staying at Paul Smith's, Camp Sagamore and Eagle Island Camp. And they were going to stay for a whole week with their partners, with their peers, for a whole week. So they were going to go to all the programs. We were going to the educational programming, everything. But even before then, all of the partners that signed up to work with us with these kids, none of the people who were who would be allowed to sustain contact with the children, all of them had to go through implicit bias training before, right? So it was a critical work on the ground, and you're talking about getting people here. We had started making entreaties to Black Outdoors, Afro Outdoors, Latino Outdoors, and so attending to all of these different areas of getting diverse communities back and forth, right? Looking at groups of people who wanted to relocate to Adirondack, and could work remotely.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's extremely informative if we think about sharing the work that some of our community organizations are doing. You've mentioned several now, and I'll make a plug to the Adirondack Experience insofar as their Museum Diversity Fellowship program, taking kids from all over, not just New York State, but all over the country, to exposing them to not just the museum world, but life within the Adirondacks, living in Blue Mountain Lake, enjoying clean water and clean air, the wilderness itself, and giving them that experience they may not otherwise have the ability to partake in, learn about, and enjoy. So I think there is a lot to be said there.
We've already signed on to work with the small communities like Hammocks to Huts, or Huts to Hammocks. I'm sorry, John, I'm getting that wrong, right?
Hamlets to Huts, I believe.
Yeah, and just working with local partners that you wouldn't even believe, the town of Saranac. And so different places that were so invested in the care and the outreach and working with the different communities that were coming up.
Absolutely. I know, I know, but the show will go on, just not at this current moment in time. But please know that there are people, places, and organizations who are already lined up, committed, willing, ready, and able to put the pedal on the metal once conditions prevail that allow us to do so. So keep that in mind. And of course, I think you mentioned this before, but our friends at DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, Commissioner Basil Sagos has been a great ally and accomplice to many. First-time campers program immediately comes to mind, amongst other initiatives. So I just want to give a shout out to the good folks at DEC on that. So let's take a look here. Let's go back to the question box. We have about 11 minutes or so, give or take. So let's see if we can squeeze a few more questions here. First, thanks for doing this informative session. You're welcome. Can you tell us what's being done to increase the number of people of color on both the Environmental Conservation Police and the Forest Ranger Force within the Adirondack Park? Diversity there is certainly needed if we are to attract a more diverse set of visitors and to increase the level of comfort. Interesting, we were just talking about this, what is it, a week and a half or two ago, but Nikki, please take it away.
So among our committees, we have the Recreation Committee, and I'm a call out my brother, Raul Aguirre, Rocky, right, who is a member of the Conservationists of Color, and so he, along with people like Chris Morris, Clifton Harcum, I believe there are others on our committee, and David Kahn is an honorary ADIAC Corps member. David has just been supersizing our programs for us and bringing in some marvelous energy, network, and literal intentionality when it comes to anti-racism work. And I called him. I said, I emailed him the other day and I said, David, you're really kicking the ass out of this anti-racist accomplishment. Yes. So yeah, so but they are really attending to, and they're already making inroads, and Raul Aguirre is very focused on getting people in leadership, people of color, Black and people of color in leadership within the conservation movement, not just as employees, in leadership. And so we have started the conversations, we've started our committees are looking at ways to, and this is your background, diversify hiring, where we're sending HSCUs and even sending to non-traditional places that are not job boards, like Black Outdoors, right? And to recruit skilled people, skilled Black people, skilled people of color to lead the conservation movement right here in the park. And so this is some of the things we're doing. We've the people at Willie and Rocky, I mean, they've been doing this for years, and you've been doing this for years. So we're taking, and that's why ADI's organizational model is not top down. It's not hierarchical.
Right.
Okay? It's a horizontal model. We work together, right?
Yeah.
And so they are focusing on that area, and we're gonna push, and we are going to create, and we're going to get, and it's I know it's a very abstract, esoteric, futuristic answer, but we do have people working committed, but it is challenging. It is challenging, but we're going to approach it by diversifying where we are recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. We have about 8 minutes or so, so I'll take the next one or two questions and then we'll conclude. Here's a great question. What can organizations, businesses, or residents do to create a more welcoming environment during the current environment? Out of curiosity, for instance, how many Black Lives Matter signs, flags, and others have you spotted? So I guess when thinking about this question here, what are outward ways in which we can show solidarity, understanding, and empathy to those who are currently hurting within our communities?
Your silence is death. Your silence means, and okay, so I'm going to speak. I had this conversation with a very good friend of mine, an anti-racist accomplice, lovely woman. And she said, I talked about the silence of Main Street after the graffiti was written, right? The same signs that you put up, that you tell people, don't worry about COVID, we've got you, we'll deliver to you, don't worry, stay home, wear your masks, is the same sign that you could put up just in support, in denouncing. And I don't want to speak I may be speaking out of ignorance, but I haven't heard from the Chamber of Commerce. I have not heard from the mayor's office since the graffiti. There are not that many of us in Saranac, the village of Saranac. These are outward shows. Put up a sign.
Mm-hmm.
Put up a sign to say we support our community. We support diverse communities. We speak out. We stand against racism, and we denounce graffiti. Anything that would divide us. Something yeah. On Main Street. But the silence is deafening. Yeah. And I just want to say that. Yeah, the silence for me is gave me a little pause.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Understandable. Nikki, let's take this last question and then we will shift downward to the outro. What have you done and what do you plan to do to reach out to colleges and universities within the Adirondacks?
We have a very ambitious plan, actually. So we have an ambitious plan of having an ADI liaison in every single college and university and institution of higher education. Well, I mean, that's going to happen because we have people like Kim Erlin, who is at NCCC, right? North Country Community College, who is the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion there. We have Clifton is at SUNY Potsdam, but we are working to build ADI affiliates, but we're also, if you, on the ADI website, you'll see we are building and designing the ADI curriculum. Right? This will be resources that are targeted to institutions of higher education that we're developing in coordination. We are developing as a team with our education committee. Okay, and if you had a window into some of the strategic vision and plans that we have, you would just, oh my God, we're ambitious. But we are starting with our ADI liaisons. We're starting to make sure that we have resources that are targeted to colleges and universities. We are starting with working with student orgs and groups. So we're going to have ADI affiliates or liaisons in the student orgs and groups so we can hear from the students. We can hear from them firsthand. And they can be resources for us because ADI is a community organization. It's about grassroots activism. It's about the community creating the action they want to see. Yeah. So this is some of the things that we're doing. These are some of the things we're doing.
Indeed, and I think it's reassuring for individuals to be more aware of how holistic of an approach that ADI is taking with making connections across numerous sectors within and throughout communities within the Blue Line. And so as we think about this and have this conversation tonight, it's worth repeating. There's a lot of things that are happening, well, a lot of contact points, a lot of organizations are becoming involved and showing their interest and their empathy to also make a change. And we're seeing a lot of that now. Nikki, we have...
I'm sorry, Donathan. If you are an organization and you want to do something more structurally, we do have our affiliate program, okay? So in the next 2 days, we're just refining the language. Donathan, you crafted that language about the affiliate program. We're expanding it so it's more specific. What does it mean? It means that your agency commits to certain, engaging certain kind of knowledges and growth first around cultural consciousness, commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, knowledges and growth. 2, it means that you commit to either your time or money, right? Investing a pocket of that, because that's what it's about. This is neoliberal capitalism, baby. Money talks. Yeah, so investing your money or your time or your resources to help ADI move our program along and becoming part of, and so I'm crafting this and I'm announcing it for send it to my core team, the SWAT program, the ADI Safe and Welcoming Adirondack Partner Program, okay? That is a certificate program that we're developing. And so our affiliates who are engaged in the long-term work, the journey, that's what it means to be an affiliate. And you can see some of our affiliates on our website if you look at the logos, a few of them. Yeah. So you want to do something that's very specific organizationally, that's something you can do. Absolutely.
Well, Nikki, any brief closing thoughts as we have about 2 minutes or so left within our conversation?
This conversation that we had is a call-in. It's not a moment for you to be sensitive or be offended about us talking about the Black experience in the Adirondack. This is not that time. This is a time for you to lean in, and wherever you are, come in, enter into the conversation, enter into the journey with us, because we are a community organization. We are here for you. We will work with you to get to the other end and to make the journey meaningful and to dismantle systemic racism and structural oppression in the park, if nothing else.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's worth noting that if you're watching this at home and having thoughts about the Adirondacks, maybe you're, I don't know, have misgivings about visiting, working, living, or playing in the Adirondacks, please reach out to us. DiversityADK.org is the website in which you can reach us. We're here for you, as Nikki said. We're here to serve the community and serve the people who call the community home. And so, Nikki, I want to thank you so very much for your insight and for sharing your experience, and expertise. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you for having me, Donathan, and thank you for being
Thursday. Hey, no problem, no problem. And for those of you who are wanting more programming and interested in more, here's a programming note for you. Next Thursday, be sure to tune in to the second installment of the Black Experience in the Adirondacks series, where the topic of conversation are who are the white community members who organize the Adirondack Diversity Initiative and why. I think there'll be an excellent panel and very insightful comments from those who you'll meet next Thursday. Information on this series is available on the ADI website at diversityadk.org, as well as the ADKX website as well. I'm Donathan Brown. She's Nikki Hilton Patterson, and thank you so very much for joining us this evening. Good night.
Thank you.